Hello and welcome. Good afternoon to anyone who's in my time zone and joining live. It's 2:48 p.m. on Monday, February 7th, where I sit, the west coast of Northern California, having some very warm weather right now. So, welcome, whether you're watching live or joining live, engaging live, or engaging the replay. And I always like to just remember and remind people that whether you're live or watching or joining for the replay, that your questions, your comments, your shares, your inquiries are all really welcome. And I believe just really add to the conversation. So I definitely always welcome that. And this is a little piece. Mainly, I hold a space that's called The Collective. And the tagline is a global web of women devoted to embodied wholeness. And the space of The Collective opens for public joining twice a year around the March equinox and the September equinox. And then I hold a space called the Fierce Grace Incubator, which I'm taking applications for and having conversations and interviews, and ultimately starts in May. And I find that these are the two sort of spaces or containers that I hold that have the most where people are like, but wait, which one do I want? I want to work with you, and I want this thing that you talk about, which is embodied wholeness, or walking through the world as a whole woman. Like, I want that. I want to practice that. I want to practice with you. I want to be in your space. I want to learn from you, some version of that. But which one of these is for me? I don't really understand what the difference is. And sometimes it's at the very structural level, right? Like, I can list off the differences, and I can do that at the end. But I sat for a while with like, well, what is this confusion, and how can I be more, how can I take better leadership or be more proactive in really naming like, oh, this is what this is for, like the space of the collective, and this is what the space of the Fierce Grace Incubator is for, that helps women who are in that space of like, yes, I want this embodied wholeness that you speak of. And if there's sort of a choice point, go like, oh, now it's clear to me which direction to go, or I'll know when I'm at the place to make a decision. So that's always what I want to do, is really just offer more and better tools to help you make the right decision for you. So the truth is, right, and this is really how I hold just my work in the world, if you will, is that it really is all about wholeness. I actually toyed for a while with the idea, when like niching, I was more into like, should I niche? And I thought about calling myself a wholeness coach, because I never can go like, no, I don't want to just, in fact, it's not even, I don't want to just work on your relationship. I'm like, but we can't. Like, if we're going to work on your relationship, we're literally going to be then addressing this other piece. And if we start, working on your business, it's guaranteed to touch your relationship. And all of this is going to come in contact with different parts of your relationship with yourself. And we live within the ecosystem of, it's certainly our own micro ecosystem that we live in, but also planet Earth. And so, of course, this is going to come into contact with how do we relate with, Earth and spirit. And so, there's this way that I often, my team or people who've worked with me over time, like, make fun of me about it, but it's like, you can't just pull on one thread. We do need to tease them apart and look at them and name like, this is a thread and this is a thread, but ultimately they always weave together. And it's really like, what is this wholeness? It's about how do we create the most beautiful weave. And by beautiful, I don't mean, someone else says like, that's a beautiful weave, but that it feels beautiful to us, right? That's actually what I believe it means to live like a successful life, or to be happy, if you will, right? Is how do I live the weave that is in the deepest alignment, and that allows all the parts of me to be known and honored and expressed, and known to myself, known to others, expressed not only, in kind of the sacred spaces, and not only just in the personal relationships, but in the intimate relationships, the friendships, in my work in the world. How do I actually walk the path of my life from a space of wholeness? And the truth is, all my work is devoted to that. And the collective and the Fierce Grace Incubator were specifically containers that I feel like we're called forth from this question of what does it mean to walk in the world as a whole and embodied woman. And I certainly don't claim expertise in the sense of like, I know, and my way is the right way. But I will say that this is drawn from my life, and not only the places where I have experienced fulfillment and success and things have worked out the way I've wanted, but the ways that I've been able to walk through my life when things haven't gone the way I've wanted and they have not gone according to plan, and when it's been really hard, and that have ultimately allowed me. This is why it's Fierce Grace, that feel like the kind of the fierceness, the grit that's required in life, and also the receiving of the grace, and really what I believe is like the true joy that's available in the world. And both Fierce Grace, the Fierce Grace Incubator, and the collective are specifically designed as containers to hold women where that's some piece of what your path is in the world, is like, how do I actually walk with wholeness? How do I engage my life with wholeness? How do I discover and embody my wholeness? Right? We don't make ourselves whole. We are already always. But then, do I feel it? Can I express it? What parts of my wholeness am I, bashful about maybe, or feel afraid, or feel limited in the expression of? So in that way, they have a lot of similarity. There's this way that every aspect of your life is welcome in the collective, and every aspect of your life is welcome in the Fierce Grace Incubator. And it's not like, oh no, you said you want to work on your business. Well, you can't bring up what's happening in your dating life or your intimate life, or, we're exploring this in the collective. Like, you can't talk about that or ask a question about that. It's always all welcome. And in that way, I believe that the container itself is wide enough to hold all of us in whatever stage and phase and part of life, whatever, step on the path we're in, and can actually meet us where we're at, so that we can take that next step that is correct for us from a place of wholeness. So both of those spaces do offer that. That is the framework and the foundation, if you will. It's always going to be the lens and perspective that I'm holding and that I'm looking through and that I'm inquiring through. And what is the difference? So what's the difference? In the broadest sense, I would say the collective really is about a wider community, right? The collective is a global web of women devoted to embodied wholeness. And so, yes, I hold at least twice a month calls that I lead and that I hold and that I guide practice on, or that I coach on. I engage, I hold the space. And the collective is really that space of community. It requires of us in that space is, how do I engage in the wider community of women? And we're going to bump up against, what does it actually mean to be engaged in a global web of women who are all devoted to embodied wholeness? But what that means in each woman's life, where she is on planet life, where she is in her life and on planet Earth, it is going to be different about how that arises and what is actually correct for her. And so in that way, the container is much wider. And although women have, come in and ultimately achieved amazing things, like taken on big things in their life, a lot of that is more self and community guided. There's less of a like, oh, this is the thing that you're working on right now. Here's step 1 and step 2. And then like, let's check in, because then we're going to work on step 3 and step 4. And let's figure out, what is actually this framework, and what actually do you need to hold you on the particular path you're on right now. In the collective, it's much more like a really extraordinary buffet where all the food is delicious. But you're going to take your plate and you're going to be like, okay, this is actually what is nourishing to me right now. And maybe it's a small amount, or maybe it's a very large amount, or maybe you're going gluten-free for right now at this time in your life, or maybe you're only eating red foods, or maybe, but you're going to self-guide in that way. And there's touch points. There's touch points with me, and there's definitely touch points with the community. And there are structures that we put in place for women to touch in and be, kind of looking for themselves, like, what is my next piece of guidance? Or what can I bump up against here to kind of show me the way next? But there's a lot more self-guidance. There are honestly probably hundreds of hours of recordings of calls on topics, ranging from pleasure, purpose, power, to boundaries, to desires, to planning your next year from a space of devotion, to practices around radiance or breath or grounding, or right. I mean, there's so much. And as a member of the collective, you have access to all of that, but also it requires of you to be like, okay, what am I really looking for, and where can I go? And there's, certainly I have guidance, but also there's the whole community of women to say like, hey, this is what's up. And some of those women have been in there now going on 3 years, and they can say, oh, I remember we did a call and we did a practice like this, and you might really like it. So there's this real network and fluid feeling. Whereas in Fierce Grace, we all start together. It's limited to 12 women. And so it's tight. It's very intimate. And in that way, not only am I very closely actually tracking each woman. Give me 5 minutes, love bug. And have that awareness, like, oh, I know who you are. I know when you came in. And maybe when women choose into Fierce Grace, they don't always know exactly what am I incubating in this space, like what is my project or what is up. But in those initial conversations, we sort of discover, right, this is the space that we're incubating right now. And then I have that awareness, right? And I'm tracking each woman. And also each woman can track each other. And maybe not quite as closely, but with 12, it's like, oh, we really know, like, yes, this is where you started. This is what you said you're working on. This is what you're bumping up against. We're tracking each other quite closely. And so in the collective, right, there's like more space. And actually sometimes women are very involved, and then sometimes they, kind of exhale, and we might not hear from them quite as much for a month or a couple months. And then they come back in, and there's that real fluidity. Whereas Fierce Grace is 8 months and it's only 12 women. And it's like, if you're choosing into the Fierce Grace incubator space, you're really choosing in and saying, now is the time for me. I actually know that right now is the time that I want to devote some of my resources of time and attention and energy, and yes, also money, into this space, because I know that right now is the time that I want to focus. So you don't have to know exactly and already have your plan when you enter Fierce Grace, but you have to know that you do want to focus, and that this is the time when being held more, I don't want to say tightly, but like being held more firmly will actually serve you. And maybe you're working on your dissertation, or maybe you're launching a new business or work in the world, or maybe there's a new creative project, or maybe as a creative, you want to work differently, or as a teacher or a coach or a leader in some way, that there's a way that you want to work differently, or that there's something new being called forward from you. And having that kind of support and that kind of holding would really benefit you and this kind of work in the world. And we have an initial conversation one-on-one, and then also we start with a deep dive, all 12 of us. It's basically 3 half days virtually, where every woman will really create, like, this is the context I'm working in. This is what I'm really focusing on, so that we all begin together in that way. And it is a choice to say, like, yes, this period of time, I know, like, I want to give my all. And I know that other people are, it's not even like holding accountable, right? But are like holding me in this space because this is the time for me. Whereas in the collective, there is that space to kind of more like pick and choose and rise and fall and have that space. There's more community. There's more of this like buffet to sort of pick and choose. In Fierce Grace, rather than like a buffet where it's all there and you guide yourself, it's almost like each woman gets her own like prefix menu. So it's not like there's one framework, one prefix menu for all 12 women in the Fierce Grace Incubator, because everybody needs to have like, you know, a beet salad and lamb chops and this dessert. But it's almost like each woman right there at the outset, we go, oh, this is your prefix menu. And, or, you know, there might be that we know what the first two pieces are, the like salad and the appetizer. And then there's going to be 3 choices for the soup and 2 choices for the main. And it's set so that actually you can relax then into the space of holding of Fierce Grace, because you're like, oh, I know that it's been created for me, but now I don't have to think anymore about what to put on my plate. It's going to come, you know, as each course comes, it's going to come, and I've already chosen it. I've already created it that way, and it will be delicious and nourishing for me. In the collective, like I said, there's a lot of variety. There's a lot of practices to choose from. There's a lot of community to find support in and also to bounce up against, and to sort of see different ways of walking through the world as a whole and embodied woman. And in the Fierce Grace Incubator, there is similarly that kind of community in the sense of, you know, correct mirroring other women who are also deeply devoted to this time together, who are also really up to big things in the world, who have creative projects or shifts in their life, who can bring that kind of, you know, reflection and correct mirroring and a focused attention on how are you, you know, how are you bringing, it might be what you're devoted to, or your work, or your new work in the world, or some new layer of leadership. But the practices are a little bit more tailor-made for that particular group. So I never run the Fierce Grace Incubator the same each year. There are certain pieces of framework that are always there. We'll always work within certain visioning processes that then we use, or the way that we hold context, or really discovering what is each woman's archetypical journey. Or there are certain practices that tend to always find their way into the Fierce Grace Incubator, but I do not hold it like, oh, call 1 is always like this, and then call 2, and then we do this step, and then this step, because the group is different every single time. And so I'm always sensing like, okay, what actually are the practices and the tools that this group needs at this time? And while in the Fierce Grace Incubator, like the collective, you do have access to my full library of teachings and practices. And so I might send you to go do that practice, but I always have my attention more on like, what does this group need? And what does this individual woman need at each step of the way in order to birth what it is that she came into the incubator to really birth through this process? And it does not always look the way we think it's going to look, right? We have an idea about what that's going to look like. And what I have found with working with women in the Fierce Grace space, you know, it's been about 6 years now, and holding space in this way, is that truly women, you know, at the end, they say like, I got more than I could have asked for. I got exactly what I wanted and more, but rarely is it in the way that they thought was going to happen. So again, it's less about like a set framework or like this kind of a thing, but we're going to incubate it and then be beautifully held in that space. I do one-on-one sessions with every woman in Fierce Grace, along with the, you know, the regular office hours coaching and along with the practice calls. And so there is really that kind of individualized tracking. And in the collective, it's much more of that broad space. Like, yes, I'm in this space of practice and embodiment and connecting with other women and weaving my life in this way. But maybe I'm just at a gentler place in my life, or maybe I really want to be in the space of picking and choosing, or for the woman at this time who really wants to be in a wider space of community, 50 women, 60 women, something like that, and more in that, like, the fluid dance of that. And then in the Fierce Grace Incubator, it's like, yeah, I want to know who's my 12, who are my 12 sisters, or who is this wise counsel. And these are really my women for this time, this period of 8 months where we're going to dive deep. And in Incubator, what it really is the space of hatching something, and it's just safe enough. It pushes just enough so that something is hatched, and it's just safe enough so that that thing that's hatched can actually hatch into the world and not, fall off a cliff and break before it's ready to hatch. So in the Fierce Grace Incubator, we do work with this framework of your archetypical journey, with what is it that you're really birthing? What is it that wants to be incubated right now? What are you birthing right now? And we really work with wholeness in the sense of distinctly working with polarities, the polarity of taking action and trust, of fierce and grace, of, doing and being, of devotion and commitment, right? We really work with those polarities, but how they actually weave for each individual woman. So I hope that gives a little bit more tangibility to, so I'm a woman on the path of embodied wholeness. Well, this sounds great, and this sounds great. And how do I know which one to choose? At a very structural level, because Fierce Grace is such a tighter container, I do speak to every single woman. There's an application process. I can link that in the comments. So if you're already a woman who's like, well, that sounds like that's actually what's drawing me, I feel drawn into that more tightly held, more clearly tracked incubator space, you can fill out the application and we'll set up a conversation just to find out if it's actually the right time for you. And we have at least 2 group calls a month. One is more guided. And again, that's where I'm sensing the whole group. Like, what is the practice? What is the guidance? What is the inquiry that this group needs at this time? And then one is more in the realm of live group coaching or office hours, where you bring what's up for you and we work with it in the moment. In addition to that, there are 3 one-on-one calls with me over the course of Fierce Grace. We will begin with, it's about 3 half days, maybe a little bit more like 3/4 days or 2/3 days of a deep dive virtual retreat for the women in Fierce Grace. And that way we really start together. We're all going to do actually the initial visioning process together so that everybody can see and feel and hear what each woman is putting into the space to be incubated. Thank you, my love. In that initial virtual retreat, and then that holds the container for the entire 8 months. I recreated Fierce Grace this year to be 8 months rather than 6 for 2 reasons. And one is so that it can begin in May and then actually carry the whole group of women through the calendar new year and into the new year, rather than stopping before the holidays and before the new year, which feels a little abrupt. Like, we've been in this beautiful holding space and now, like, just carry on at the hardest time of the year for so many people. And so this will actually carry through that end of the year time, carry through the calendar new year. And we won't complete, I can't remember if it's February or March, but it's a full 8 months. And there will also be 2 month-long periods that are planned rest, metabolization, and integration periods. And so we'll spend the time leading up to those actually creating, like, what is this rest, metabolization, and integration period for each woman? Is it totally about just like letting go, resting, taking a vacation? Is that what she needs? Is there one practice that would carry her through? Is there a series of kind of practices that would hold her during that time? Are there things that she is committing to in accountability because that's what she really needs? So we'll set each woman up for those periods that are about integration and metabolization. And then all the other months, we'll have at least 2 group calls, and you'll also have your 3 one-on-ones with me. And in the collective, I hold twice monthly at least calls that I hold, and they're always very close to the new and the full moon. We work with the cycles of the moon, we work with the cycles of the season, we work with the solstices and the equinox. I bring in guest teachers. There are also, women in that community hold like co-working spaces when they feel called to. Like, it's also, there's a lot of community being created all the time. And there is that sense that you can really drop in. And because it's a year-long commitment, you have all this time. And there's not this pressure, like I have to show up for every call and I have to be there and I have to like stay up to date on all the work. It's like there's going to be so much offered, and that it really is that place of like, oh, this is what's nourishing right now. Just because we're at a buffet that's filled with like all my favorite food doesn't mean that stuffing myself to the point of sickness is actually what serves me. One day I can eat really lightly, and the next day I can have one really, significant meal in the middle of the day. And then I know that the next day there's still something there for me if I want to go watch the replay, or there's a community forum that's available all the time where I can bounce ideas or just share a celebration. And both of the spaces, because again, we're talking about wholeness, both spaces are really, really, we hold celebration so sacred. And of course, bringing anything that we're challenged by or bumping up against or stuck, or if we're in grief or sadness or loss. But also I find, especially in the personal growth world, that this like celebration and this place of bragging and what are you proud of and what have you accomplished. So many times I talk to women and they're like, I don't know what I've done. And I kind of feel like I'm slacking on the job and maybe I'm wasting my time. And if we spend a little time reflecting on, well, what have you done and what have you accomplished? And where were you a week ago and where are you now? And what decisions did you make? And that we come up with this long list that's like, actually, you've done so much. We're so hard on ourselves. So there's regular reflection, regular celebration, regular place to be celebrated by each other. Trying to see if there's anything else I want to say. But just so that you know, we do have a site for the collective. I'll drop that in the comments because you can see so much more about it. There is right now not a sales page for Fierce Grace, although there will be one coming, and it'll have a lot of the logistics laid out. But I will drop the link for the application for Fierce Grace if any of you are feeling intrigued or called to that. And the collective will open for registration, March 18th. So in fact, we'll probably invite women who are on the wait list earlier than that, because we do have a cap. I don't know the number right now that we're capping at, but we will cap that. And so we'll be inviting women on the wait list. So if you heard this or you read the sales page and you're like, oh my God, that sounds amazing, you can just click join the wait list. There's no obligation. We're not going to trick you into giving us your credit card information. You'll just be the first to know when the doors open for public enrollment. I hope this is helpful in some way, shape, or form. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of your morning, day, afternoon, or evening, depending on where you are in space and time. Ciao.